Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome back. It is indeed the Iftar Drive, the weekend Iftar, the weekend edition of Iftar Drive. And we are together up until around 6 p.m. this afternoon as we take you towards Iftar. And to begin off with the show, we're actually kicking off and we're going to dive straight into our first interview and our first discussion for today. Of course, it is Sunday, so what we are doing is we are connecting with young South Africans from across the country who have made their mark in their career and are building quite remarkable careers for themselves. And of course, this afternoon, one of the guests for the segment this afternoon, in fact, let me just introduce her. We are joined now by Ms. Nonceba Mhlauli. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I was actually getting it a bit wrong earlier on, prior to this show and prior to going live. But Nonceba, good afternoon and welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon, Zahid, and thank you so much for having us, and good afternoon to your viewers as well.
All right, so it is great having you on the show. Let's just, before we get straight into it, I just want to let the listeners know. So, Nonceba is, in fact, the spokesperson for the ministry in the presidency of the Republic of South Africa. She's also an ANC activist, and yeah, she joins us now on the show to share her story with us. Of course, we are pressed for time this afternoon, so Nonceba is going to actually have to leave us a little bit earlier than we had anticipated. But let's try and see how far we can get with this conversation. So let's dive right into it, Ms. Mhlauli. So first of all, tell us about your story and a bit of an introduction to yourself. Where were you born? Where did you grow up, and what was your family life like?
Wow. Okay. I feel like I'm in a job interview. You know, they always the first question in a job interview is always tell us about yourself. No, thanks for that. I was born in a small town in the Northern Cape called Uppington, which is actually a beautiful small town that the Orange River actually flows through the town. If you ever want to take a short left in South Africa, Uppington is definitely a place to consider. So I was born in a township called Babalelo. It's the only black township actually in Uppington, because obviously of apartheid and the Group Areas Act. The townships were organized based on race. So it's actually the only black township in South Africa in Uppington. I started my schooling in Uppington and later moved to Joburg, where I basically grew up for most of my childhood. I then moved back to Uppington to finish off high school. And while I was at high school, I was involved in different, like community projects. I was involved in Love Life. I was involved in PASA, which was called I was a peer educator for PASA, which was the Planned Parenthood Association of South Africa, basically teaching teenagers, values of abstinence and, being responsible, making good, right decisions for your life, etc. I was also involved in a local drama group in my township, which was called Masakane, and it's actually still around so many years later. Um, I was involved in debating in high school. I was involved with ANC Youth League from a very young age as well, while I was at high school. And I think generally my township is generally a very politically conscious. It has a lot of people who are quite politically conscious. Even at home, I come from a very political home as well. Yeah, my grandmother and my grandfather were involved in the struggle. They were involved in with Umkhonto weSizwe, and so on and so forth. I then went to I then went to Rhodes University, where I studied and did my undergraduate degree and some of my postgrad degrees as well. I did at Rhodes, and then I ended up working, and as I'm still working today. So that's in a nutshell my early life and what it was like growing up as a young person.
So at the moment, you are a spokesperson in the presidency, correct? And you are also recently, I think it was earlier this month, that you were appointed at a position in the ANC Youth League as well. So quite a fantastic career thus far, and you are quite young as well. And so from Uppington, from the small, gentle town of Uppington, then, as you explained, you went over to Johannesburg, and I think now, I believe, I'm assuming you are based in Pretoria now, that you are working in the presidency, right? Um, so how did your early life and the environment in which you grew up, how did this influence you in becoming the person that you are today?
I think it had everything to do with who I am and where I am right now in life. So maybe to continue on from where I left off with the previous response. I went to study journalism and politics at Rhodes University, where I was also very much involved in student activism. I was the first branch secretary and branch chairperson of the ANC Youth League on campus. I was involved in the South Africa Student Congress, which I ended up leading at a national level as well. And I was also involved in the Young Communist League of South Africa. After that, obviously, when I started working, even my work had always been, to some extent, had involved some level of political activism. I moved to Cape Town, obviously, where I worked. My first job actually was for the Southern African Clothing and Textile Workers Union, where I was working as a researcher, which is a trade union of COSATU. I then worked for the ANC in Parliament. So I'd always just been in a very political environment, whether it's through activism, whether it's at a professional level through my work. And even now, even though I'm in the presidency, I'm in a political office because the ministry is a political office. So I think my
Mm,
whole life has just been a trajectory of politics, of activism, and it's really just been the same thing in different forms from when I was as young as 14 until now that I'm 30 years old. I think it's always been political activism in one way or another, whether it's through academia, whether it's through student activism, whether it's through, my professional career, and so on and so forth. I think it's always just been in a space of politics. Yeah.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, the politics that has been with you throughout most of your life, and you do describe yourself as an activist. So at this stage, what would you say are some of the biggest challenges that young South Africans in particular, and maybe even more broadly speaking, South Africans in general, what's the challenges that we face at this time?
I think one of the challenges that young people face is that there's a lot of apathy. There's a lot of apathy around among young people where they feel excluded, either because they don't have jobs, either because they can't access an institution of higher learning, either because that they can't access, the commanding heights of the economy. And that has really made them feel very, removed and despondent, to become activists, to participate in the economy, to participate in the life in the life of the development, of the country. And I think that that is really it's an indication of a youth that is becoming removed from things that we should ordinarily be very worried about, and becoming very removed from things that ordinarily we should, be taking a stand on, and to say, as young people, because we are the future of the country, we demand X, Y, and Z. So I think for me, the exclusion that young people have faced in all spaces, in all spheres of society, have led to a great level of despondence. And that great level of despondence has led us to a situation whereby young people, because they don't feel, catered for, they then leave those spaces unattended. And you have a situation whereby, like you have right now, where you don't find young people in leading, certain industries. You don't find young people in the political space. You do find them, obviously, but they're not at the forefront of those spheres or sectors within society. And I do think that unless if we are going to address those key challenges that are faced by young people, unless if we're going to be able to address issues of unemployment, issues of access to institutions of higher learning, issues of substance abuse, issues of crime, of gender-based violence, all of those things that really affect young people on a day-to-day basis. We are not going to get to a point where young people feel included, young people feel that they have a contribution to make to our democracy.
And just about that point, I think it's a really important point which you mentioned. Do you think the leadership at this point is hearing what young people have to say in South Africa? Are we bridging that gap, and to ensure inclusivity, and to ensure that what happens in the country, at a government level as well, youth are actually being involved and participating in the processes? Are they being is this being enabled for them?
I think we are at a point now where there is some movement. I think there was a lot of stagnation, before, and I think we are at a point now where I'll make the example of my party and with the whole youth league thing. I mean, I was at the forefront or part of a grouping that was advocating for the organization, which is the youth league, to be given back to young people because they are the actual members who ought to be tasked with rebuilding the organization. And I think you know that struggle, we pushed that for a good year and a half, and the fact that there's now sort of an acceptance that young people ought to be at the forefront of determining their own future. That realization is there, and that acceptance is there, and you can see even in Parliament. You'll see in the last elections, there was a big push to have, young members of parliament to a lot of the parties across the board were very deliberate in gaining and getting young people to become members of parliament and, become public representatives and so on and so forth. So I do think that there is a slow movement towards this not it's not even inclusion one, but also affirmation of the existence of youth leadership and affirming youth leadership. Because the other thing that we need to also know is that, and I always say this, that there is no shortage of youth leadership in South Africa. The only problem that has been is that it had not been affirmed to the extent that it's supposed to be affirmed over the years. And I do think that now we do see a slow movement towards really affirming the leaders that are there as leaders of today and leaders of tomorrow, and giving them responsibility. Former President Khalim Motlanthe always says that the best way to teach a young person is to give them, uh, you know, to give them roles of responsibility, is to give them leadership positions and positions where they have to, exercise their leadership qualities. So I do think that even in government there is a slow move towards it. I'm not convinced that the move is is happening at a pace and scale that it ought to be happening, but there is some movement that we've seen in the recent past that we hadn't seen before.
And some people may have indicated previously that youth these days are quite interested in participating in democracy in other ways, as opposed to the formal structures such as elections and stuff. If you look at election turnout, it's some have described it as being a bit disappointing in terms of youth participating in elections and stuff like that. So do you think there's something that needs to be changed within the system itself, altered a bit, perhaps to accommodate for this shift in interest amongst the new generation?
Absolutely. I think that, I mean, one, the way in which, just at a and I think it's a twofold answer. One is the manner in which parties are structured in South Africa, or have traditionally been structured in South Africa, including my own, including the official opposition and other opposition parties. haven't really responded or adapted to the interest of young people across the board. Even in the manner in which they do their campaigning, for an example, hasn't really responded to the fact that you're not gonna, if you're gonna say that if you're gonna want to campaign to me to vote, you're not gonna do it through a door-to-door campaign, because chances of me being home and you finding me at home as a potential voter, are very slim. But you'll most probably find me on Twitter. You know, you'll most probably
Mm,
find me on Instagram, on Facebook, etc. So those are the kind of things that I think, at a party level, the parties haven't been able to adapt as quickly to capture the youth audience, in terms of how they reach the youth audience. One, two. I also do think that the current the High Court, not the High Court, the Constitutional Court judgment around the electoral system is definitely going to be a game changer in South Africa
mm,
and South African politics, because now young people no longer have to join a political party to become involved in, or to become a public representative or a political leader. You can decide to start your own campaign without opting into a proportional representative system, or without opting into the party system. So I do think that the space that we are in and what's going to happen in the near future will definitely give us, a lot of space to maneuver in terms of young people and their interest in getting involved in politics.
mm. And of course, amongst the older generation, there's this notion that well, I think it is quite true that public positions that are held, really need experience. Um, do you think young people are capable of taking up these leadership positions, or should they, maybe be a balance between people of the older generation and the younger generation? Is this gap being bridged? Uh, you know, are young people capable, in your opinion, of fulfilling leadership roles and positions?
I think young people are more than capable, and I think we've demonstrated that young people are more than capable to lead themselves, and to provide solutions to some of the very complex problems we face in South Africa. Um, I do think also that the problem is that when we want our space that we rightfully ought to claim as young people, the older generation often feels as though we want to wipe them out. And there's no intention of wiping out anyone. All we are saying is that we want our space, we want to be able to determine our own future, and we want to be able to make a contribution that we believe we can make. So, for me, the emergence of youth leadership does not mean that we want to wipe out older people. But also, I also do not think that the current generation of, older leaders have demonstrated their ability to provide effective solutions to some of the problems that we have in South Africa. Because if that was the case, you wouldn't have an ever climbing, unemployment rate that is just, especially among young people. It's literally just, going, it's increasing by the day, by the year. So I do think that the cry of young people, or the cries of youth in South Africa, is that give us the space that we rightfully ought to be occupying. And us demanding our space does not mean that we want to wipe people out, but we also believe that we have the ability um to make a positive contribution, and that really the role of the older generation actually ought to be to provide support and guidance, because from where I'm seated, it's not a competition, and the two actually would complement each other very well.
Mm. Youth solutions to youth problems, right? um, and this is, after all, this is a personality profile. So we just delved in a bit about youth leadership and your views on those, and it's really interesting, quite informative, and interesting to hear what you have to say, in regards to these issues. But just coming a bit closer back to the purpose of this interview, which is a personality profile interview. What are you most passionate about?
Um, this might be a cliche answer, but I'm very passionate about activism. I'm very passionate about South Africa and its future, and the role that young people can play in that. And that's what I do on a daily basis. I was speaking at an event yesterday, and I was talking about how we are not activists for the sake of being activists. We are activists for the sake of, you know, bringing about change in society. We are activists because we want to right the many wrongs that are there in South Africa, and in our society, and a life of activism. It's a life. It's something that you live every day. It's something when you see an injustice, it doesn't sit well with you, and you want to, you want to do something about it. And that's the life that I've chosen. That's what I do on a daily basis, every day, the whole day. And that's the one thing I'm really really passionate about, and it's something that I hope that in the end it does it's not something that becomes, or a life or a path that one would have chosen that would be in vain, but one wherein you can, you know, comfortably sit back 10 years from now and say that I'm really happy with the contribution that I was able to make.
And I think that is, the purpose of activism, to inspire change, and it is quite a fulfilling passion, I believe. So I think just a final question before I let you go: your message to fellow South Africans, South Africans in general, and more particularly, perhaps, young South Africans.
My message would be that the future of this country is in our hands, and the problems of South Africa will not be solved by anyone else except for us. And we have to take a stand up, and come together, and make a contribution to the prosperity of South Africa. The idea that, you know, that the future of South Africa belongs to a few people, for me, is a very unfounded one. And that if anything is going to improve in this country, it will only improve because you and I decided to do something about it. And when we sit at home and we don't do anything, that's when you see regression in society happening. So I think really my message is, let's get together, let's stand up, and let's do something towards a positive contribution for the prosperity of our beautiful nation.
Yes, indeed. And I think there's a lot more for us to discuss. And, I would really have loved to continue this discussion. I've been enjoying it for, I think, the past 25 minutes or so, nearly 25 minutes. And it's been a great discussion. But thank you so much for your time. And I would not, take up much more of your time. I do understand that you've got to rush over to a meeting right now. Sunday afternoon, I think that's quite passionate about what you do, a Sunday afternoon. And you're still willing and keen to come on radio, and then still, go straight after that interview. So I think that's really great. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me, and I really hope that this will be the first of many other conversations that we'll have in the future.
Yes, indeed, and we still got to chat about the podcast story. So, but that's behind
Yes,
the scenes. We'll talk about that later
yes,
on.
no,
But
absolutely,
thank
absolutely.
Yes,
Thank you
indeed.
for
I look
having me.
forward to
Thank you
that
so much.
conversation with you. It's been a pleasure having
Thanks.
you on the
Bye-bye.
show. That was Ms. Nonceba Mhlauli. She's just joined us this afternoon briefly. Unfortunately, I mean, I would have loved to have her much longer. It was quite an interesting discussion thus far. Maybe we could get her once again, for the Youth Day discussions. Once again, I hope so. But she's the spokesperson for the ministry in the presidency of the Republic of South Africa. She's also an ANC activist. In fact, she's at the ANC Youth League as well. But that's where we're going to have to leave it for today. And it's been a great pleasure speaking to her. We're not done yet with the show. Of course, we are together up until Iftar time. So that should be until around 6:45 this evening. So when we're going to take an ad break right now. And when we get back, we are speaking to yet another young South African, Mohammed Chinara. And he's actually going to be contesting the elections this year, the local government elections, which are going to take place later on this year. Please do stay tuned.